For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome. You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. Books on China and Chinese Communist Party and its behavior are something that one keenly looks forward in India, at least of late, because of the interest generated by the last year's standoff between India and China and the renewed interest people are taking in the Chinese society, Chinese diplomacy, Chinese military. So with me today is Peter Martin joining us from Washington, D.C., and you're on Books Corner. So as I said, Peter Martin joins me from Washington, D.C. He's a journalist with Bloomberg News and also author of his latest book, A Chinese Civilian Army and the China's Civilian Army, rather. He's written about the diplomats and the Chinese diplomats' tactics of wolf warrior diplomacy that they have been practicing of late for at least a decade now. What is the history, what is the background, and why do Chinese diplomats behave as they do is something that he has detailed in this very well-researched book, very well-written book, which has a lot of historical insights as well as insights into the current status of the Chinese diplomacy. Welcome to this program, Peter.
Thanks so much for having me.
In fact, indeed, our pleasure. And let me just start by asking you a bit of your background, your association with China, and how long did you work there?
Yeah, so I first moved to China in 2008 as a student, as China was wrapping up the Beijing Olympics and just kind of stepping onto the world stage in a more active way, and I've lived there a few times since 2008, but most recently as a political correspondent for Bloomberg News from 2017 to 2020.
Oh, that's great. So you have substantial experience of China and the Chinese society, and it clearly shows in your book. In fact, you call it the civilian army, the diplomats. Now, when you say they are a civilian army, clearly, as you bring it out in the book, they sort of follow the same discipline as the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. They, in fact, undergo month-long training, if I am not mistaken, in the military before they join the foreign service. So what does that bring to the table as far as Chinese diplomats are concerned? How are they different from the other countries' diplomats?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that was really in the design of the foreign ministry from the very outset. So when China first put together its diplomatic corps in 1949, it was kind of a closed, paranoid communist state, and it needed to interact with the outside world. And so the best model that its leaders could think of for that was to emulate the People's Liberation Army, which is the Communist Party's own fighting force, which is loyal not to the Chinese government, but to the Chinese party. And it wanted its diplomats to kind of act on that model. So, to unfailingly follow orders, to stand up and fight for China's interests whenever necessary, even using what we would now call wolf warrior tactics, and to maintain an incredible degree of secrecy as well, to the extent where diplomats will sometimes or will often walk around in pairs to make sure that they can keep tabs on each other.
Oh, indeed. In fact, one of the things that you just mentioned, and I think most Chinese people just don't understand the difference between being loyal to the government and loyal to the party. In fact, if you see some of the comments in the chat box, if you are able to see, I am able to see that, they are already asking questions that why are you so concerned about it? Should they be loyal to some other country? I think this whole understanding about being loyal to the party and loyal to the country is not understood there. Is that something that you came across in your research, in your interactions with the Chinese diplomats, or they are so well trained and house trained that they don't even see the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chinese diplomats are very good at presenting this this image of like, oh, no, our system works just like yours, and kind of papering over some of those differences. But I think it's very revealing if you listen to the way that they speak during key anniversaries, for example, of the party's founding, or on the anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. They'll tend to hone in on speaking about the Communist Party in a way that would be quite unusual for diplomats to do in, say, the United States or Britain, where you tend to speak on behalf of the government, but your loyalties as a professional civil servant are supposed to transcend just one political organization.
Indeed. In fact, you do well to trace the origins of the Chinese diplomatic corps in 1949, that famous meeting or the speech that Zhou Enlai, China's first premier and one of the top leaders under Mao, did to the group of early diplomats. Now, there itself, I think the tone was set, and Zhou Enlai was very clear what they needed to do. And it's very instructive from your book that they did not want the nationalist government's diplomats to be on board because they were not sure about their loyalties. I think that's where the roots of the history of Chinese diplomacy lies. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was political loyalty above all, before any kind of policy consideration, or how well China might be presented to the outside world. It was all about making sure that the political cards were aligned in the right way, and emulating the People's Liberation Army was the best way to do that.
Indeed. In fact, you also trace Edgar Snow's journey to the capital of the Chinese leadership, or the CCP's hideout in deep into rural China of the 1940s and earlier. So now the Chinese diplomats have also perfected this art of winning over media people, media houses, and making deep inroads. Is that part of their, I would say, duties or responsibilities? Do you think that's a very well thought out kind of an approach that they've done? What's your sense on that?
I think this is something that's really crucial, actually, if you're looking at the way that China communicates with the outside world, to look at this idea of friendship and foreign friends of China. And that's something, of course, that has quite an innocent sounding tone to us, but has a very, very specific meaning in the Communist Party, which is identifying a foreigner who is essentially willing to give the Communist Party the benefit of the doubt, to listen to the party's side of the story, perhaps in exclusion to other parts of the story, and to do that often in return for special access to senior leaders or to parts of the country where maybe other journalists or other foreigners can't go. And that's a model that that China started using. The Chinese Communist Party started using even before it took power, as you said, with Edgar Snow when he visited this remote Communist Party base in the 1930s. And it's also something that China does now. It's taking YouTube and Twitter influences along to Xinjiang in order to kind of soften the image of the security state there. And so it's a very, very enduring behavior.
I think that's something that has lasted. It has lasted for these 7 decades since the PRC's diplomacy began. One of the strong points of your book is also the interplay between the Chinese Communist Party, some of its spokespersons, what their upbringing was. And I think you've given and sort of brought to light, to my view at least, for somebody like me, that Zhou Enlai was the father of modern Chinese diplomacy. Modern means the PRC diplomacy. In that sense, how would you rate his contribution? Is it still impactful? Is it still sort of carried forward by the current diplomats?
Yeah, it's amazing actually when you talk to Chinese diplomats about his legacy, because he really is held up as you said, as the founding father of the ministry. And I remember one Chinese diplomat said to me, "Well, in the foreign ministry, you can criticize Mao Zedong, you can criticize nearly anyone else, but you cannot criticize Zhou Enlai." And that's because I think he laid down this model that made it possible for quite a closed state to start to interact with the outside world in a way that was meaningful. And I think, the closest figure that I can think of in kind of comparison would be J. Edgar Hoover's impact on the FBI in terms of that kind of that strength of personality being able to shape an institution over time.
Over time, yes. In fact, larger than life perspective in that sense, I think he's still remembered like J. Edgar Hoover. Zhou Enlai has to be given that credit. And I think he could be both ruthless as well as very suave and persuasive, as you rightly bring out in the book. Also, I think his background and his proficiency in various languages and the kind of exposure he had very early in life in Japan, in France, did help him to see the world differently than the other Communist Party leaders.
Yeah, I think so. And Zhou was able to accomplish that very, very difficult task of taking this very narrow and limited set of things that the Communist Party was willing to say in public, and kind of using the strength of his personality and the depth of his experience to make that sound human and appealing to the outside. And I think that's always been the case, that the very best Chinese diplomats are able to take those kind of narrow, tightly controlled messages and make them sing. At other times when China has come across as more abrasive or offensive to the outside world, it's often been because diplomats don't want to finesse those messages. They would rather just hammer them home in kind of that wolf warrior style that we've all become so accustomed to.
Yes, in talking about wolf warrior tactics, when do you think, can you look back and trace the beginning of this kind of little aggressive behavior by the Chinese diplomats across the globe? It's not just in smaller countries, but they have behaved what in terms of diplomacy very obnoxiously in Australia, sometimes in India, sometimes even in Pakistan, for instance, despite the friendship between China and Pakistan. When do you think the Chinese diplomats became aggressive and perhaps in some cases arrogant?
Well, I think it's kind of an evolution that's taken place since 2008. So as I said, China had just hosted the Olympics, and then hot on the heels of the Olympics came the global financial crisis. And, the United States and especially Europe seemed very sluggish in the way that they handled that challenge. But China was very decisive, putting out an incredibly large stimulus package for its economy. And Chinese leaders started to kind of think, well, actually, you know what, maybe there's a China model here that we can put up as an alternative. And so I think that the turn really started then. And then it accelerated when Xi Jinping became Communist Party leader in 2012 and kind of went into overdrive when the coronavirus pandemic spread across the world. And although, of course, the virus had started out in Wuhan, the party was able to use some of its techniques of social control to really get a lock on the virus inside China, as North America and large parts of Europe really, really struggled to contain it. And at that point, China was under great criticism for its economic policies, for its border standoff with India, for its alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang and elsewhere. And its diplomats kind of said, hey, actually our model works pretty well here and we're going to defend it vigorously. And so I kind of see that historical evolution as the roots of wolf warrior diplomacy.
Oh, yes. But there is a question from one of our viewers here for you, Peter. If you can read at the bottom of your screen. I think the diplomacy or the tactics have worked well so far. But I also have a question. Is it now counterproductive, and is it that the countries have started pushing back against this aggressive behavior, combined with this question?
Yeah, I think it is counterproductive. It's very difficult to see examples of where it's really succeeded in winning opinion over for China. So there are certain politicians, I think of someone like Viktor Orban in Hungary, maybe Vladimir Putin in Russia, who like that kind of very abrasive way of addressing the West because it fits with their own political agenda. But in India is a terrific case in point. This wolf warrior diplomacy is helping to contribute to alienating a billion-person major developing country on China's border, with which it has a territorial dispute, at the same time as US partners and allies are starting to work more closely together and talking about the threat that China might pose across the region. And so, I can't imagine how that could be in China's best interest to have that take place, and yet that seems to be the trend. And so, to me, it does come across as quite counterproductive. And I think that a lot of Chinese diplomats actually, deep down, feel the same way.
Well, that remains to be seen, because they rarely, if ever, go out of line or step out of that red line that they have imposed on themselves. And in fact, I think the whole Chinese behavior stems from the fact that loss of face is not something that is acceptable either to the party or to society. Did you come across this, that no setback is acceptable, no defeat is tolerated? Does that permeate from the society to the diplomatic corps, or is it the other way around?
I think that there might be some roots there in Chinese culture, but for me, the kind of more important consideration is the way that the Communist Party works and the pressure that it puts on its people to be unfailingly loyal. And that pressure really intensifies at times when the political atmosphere in Beijing is a little tense or unstable. And so, you think of the last few years, Xi Jinping has led a sweeping anti-corruption campaign, which has punished 1.5 million officials. He's using re-education camps in Xinjiang. He has abolished presidential term limits. He's focusing on ideology. He's cracking down on big Chinese companies that are perceived to have gotten out of line. And so if you're a Chinese diplomat and you're told, well, Xi Jinping really wants you to act tough and he doesn't want China to ever look weak on the world stage, that's quite an intimidating background for you, and you're probably going to go out of your way to make sure that you are tough on every occasion that presents itself. And so, there may be some kind of social or cultural background to that in addition, but to me, it's really those drivers from inside the Communist Party that are most important.
I think that overhang of the Communist Party ideology, as well as Communist Party's practice to keep people and the society in control, and therefore the surveillance state that it sort of runs and manages, perhaps also contributes largely to the diplomatic behavior, certainly. But just to conclude, Peter, one final thought. Will this diplomacy continue, you think, or as China goes through a bit of a kind of a churn, slowing down economy, no friends abroad except for maybe North Korea and Pakistan, the diplomats will have to, and indeed, if you go by Xi Jinping's recent pronouncement that go and win love for China across the world, will that change diplomacy, or will it continue the way it behaves so far?
Well, I think that that question really cuts to the heart of it. In the past, Chinese diplomats and China's leaders have been quite successful at spotting when the country's reputation is suffering internationally and kind of recalibrating their diplomacy in order to start winning friends again and and often softening China's image in the process. And I think what's been striking about the last decade is that recalibration has been so long in the making and doesn't seem to have appeared. And Xi Jinping gave these remarks where he said that China needed a more lovable image. But I think what's really interesting about that is that he really talked about improving the messaging for China and telling China's story better. But it's not just a messaging problem that China has in its external relations, right? It's a policy problem. There is no way to package re-education camps in Xinjiang in a way that is going to be appealing to US political elites. There is no way to repackage China's stance on its territorial disputes, whether that's on the border with India or in the South China Sea, in a way that is appealing to the outside world. And I don't really see any sign that China wants to shift those policies. And if those policies don't shift, I think it's also hard for the image to improve alongside. Hey, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you there. This is, I guess, the occupational hazard of living with the pandemic, right? There's a tech problem on every call.
No. That's over. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Now.
Okay, fine. I think there was some technical problem as you mentioned. So one question our reader had: is it available in India, the book? And I was just saying, good luck for your sales, and a very well crafted book. Compliments to you. Thank you for joining us this evening, Peter.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the book is going to be available in India from August onwards. I think you can probably get it on Kindle now. And Oxford University Press, I know, cares a lot about the Indian market. And I hope that it will be as widely available as possible there. Thanks very much.